Okay, and now I introduce the last paper. The winner of the Exemplary Empirics Track Award, Algorithmic Pricing Facilitates Tacit Collusion, Evidence from E-Commerce by Leon Musolff.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Leon Musolff. I'm at Microsoft Research New England as of yesterday, so please don't blame them for any mistakes in this paper. They are all mine. I just graduated from my PhD at Princeton, and I'm going to be at Wharton next year. And today I'm here to talk to you about how algorithmic pricing facilitates tacit collusion. And I am really glad that I get to go after this wonderful presentation we had just now, because it is essentially on the same topic, right? So I am going to show you the empirical side of a very similar situation. We're not in the advertising space, we're in the retail space, we're not doing bidding, we're doing pricing, but at the end of the day, a lot of the same ideas apply. So as an introduction, let's just think about a couple of key trends that I think are very clear in the economy at the moment. The economy is digitizing, so it's become very easy as a firm to monitor your rivals' prices, right? You can just scrape them off the website. At the same time, because your own prices are on a website, you can update them however often you want, and there are no real menu costs involved anymore. Now, because of these two trends, we're increasingly seeing pricing decisions delegated to algorithms and delegated to computers. Now, it's not quite like in the advertising world where there's 30,000 bits a second, but you still see very, very frequent price changes on all of these online retailers. As an economist, what I worry about is that this could take the pricing game from a static one-shot game into a dynamic setting. Why do I worry about this? Because I worry about prices being the result of collusion, right? If you and we price in a static Nash equilibrium, I know my best response is to price at marginal cost or at an appropriate markup if there's some demand curve involved. But if you and I are engaged in this repeated pricing game, then I might know that if I lower my price, that's going to affect your price negatively, and I might update on that. So with these two trends, defections might have become easier to detect. So if you and we agree we're going to price at $5, then maybe the moment that you undercut me, I know, and I can punish you for that, right? And I can punish you also very quickly because I can update my prices very quickly. So as a preview of my results today, what we will find is that actually algorithmic pricing can facilitate tacit collusion. And the way this comes about empirically in my data set is actually kind of interesting, because historically, these algorithmic reprices, they were mostly used for price undercutting. And eventually, if you use a repricer, I use a repricer, we end up in a price war that's really tough competition. So these repricing algorithms were forced to innovate. And as these margins eroded, they essentially came up with this new strategy where they say, okay, well, rather than me just undercut you and you undercut me and we end up at a really low price, at some point, why don't I just increase my price back up again? And if you're undercutting me, you will follow me back up, and now we have a tacitly collusive pricing outcome. Okay, but before I give away all the results, let me give you a quick outline. I'm very briefly going to go through the setting, then I'm going to tell you a bit about the repricer effect on impact, so what happens right after I activate a repricer. Then we're going to talk about cycling empirics. Cycling is this tacitly collusive phenomenon that is, I would argue, the most interesting in my data set. I'm going to give you a little bit of theory about it, just enough to explain why the welfare properties of cycling are so bad, and then I will conclude. So the setting today is a setting I think we are all familiar with. It is Amazon Marketplace. So just in case you don't know, on Amazon Marketplace, third parties co-list amongst Amazon's own offers.
Can I get you to pause for a second, because we lost our connection to Gather, so the virtual audience can't hear you.
Oh dear, okay.
Take a deep breath and we'll switch over to a different machine.
It's the time for exclusive in-person content. I wish I had like an additional theorem I could only...
Turn here.
Okay, perfect. Okay, people on Gather, I hope I have you back. Let me restart at the setting. I promise no exclusive content was released only to in-person attendees. Okay, so the setting that I'm going to examine is Amazon Marketplace. So this is a website where third parties can co-list amongst Amazon offers for various items. And a key feature of this website is that there is very intense competition between merchants because merchants often list various offers for the same products. And so you can imagine if I'm trying to sell you this Nike shoe and someone else is trying to sell you the exact same Nike shoe, that leads to intense competition. On Amazon Marketplace, that's actually institutionalized via this buy box, which I'm depicting for you right here. So basically, when you click Add to Cart or Buy Now, it's not you that's choosing which merchant you're buying from, it's Amazon that's choosing. And Amazon is choosing this with a price elasticity of around -19, as I show in other research. So very intense competition, which explains why 53% of large sellers, according to a Feedvisor survey from 2018, so now 4 years out of date, are actually using reprices. How do these reprices work? Well, Amazon has a convenient API called the Marketplace Web Services API, and it will just tell you if you're a repricer. It will tell you immediately if one of the competitors of your clients changed the price. It will push a notification your way. You can automatically calculate the new price for your client and send it back to Amazon. And this whole cycle can complete in 15 minutes on average, but maybe even faster than that sometimes. Now, what we're going to use to examine this setting is novel high-frequency data that we actually sourced from a repricing company. So the beauty of this is that we observe the full information set underlying the repricing decisions. Although, as I will show you later, there is actually not that much magic involved, so this is not that large a set. But what we see is prices, we see the buy box status, we see sales ranks, we also see sales, and most importantly, we see what the firms tell this repricing company what the strategy should be. According to which their prices are set. And just as an example, there is various of these repricing companies. I'm not supposed to tell you which one is my data source. This may or may not be my data source repricing strategy interface, but all of these companies have an interface that looks something like this. Let's just focus on the left picture here. There you can see how, as a merchant, you can configure your strategy. And very commonly, you will have a compete with lowest price strategy, and it's often as simple as just undercut the lowest price by a given amount, often 1 cent or maybe a little bit more. And just as a little bit of foreshadowing, there is this, when there is no competition selection box right at the bottom, or when the competition is below your minimum price. Now this is important because what do you do if you're always undercutting your opponent by 1 cent, but then you reach your minimum price? Do you go back up to your maximum, or do you just stick at your minimum? That's going to drive a lot of the results today. Now, the first thing I want to do with this data that we have is I want to know what's actually on average the effect of repricing. Right? I know that there is interesting, complicated things that can happen with these strategies. I've seen these interfaces, but it's important to have a baseline for understanding what on average is the effect of repricing on the market. So what I can do here is I can use a regression discontinuity design to examine this question. So the key trick is that there is typically a lag between a firm signing up with this repricing services and actually activating the repricer. The reason for that is relatively boring. You only start getting charged once you actually turn on the repricer, right? And the interface is quite complicated. So you might want to take a couple of days just to familiarize yourselves. Also, pricing can be quite high stakes if you have a lot of products. One of the clients of this company had like 100,000 products. You might want to, make sure that you're not configuring the wrong rules. So intuitively, what I can then do is I can compare prices or various other outcome measures just before versus just after the repricer activation. And I want to be clear that here the identifying assumption I'm implicitly making is that the exact date of the repricer activation is exogenous. Now, by exact date, I literally mean like today or tomorrow. I don't mean like this quarter or next quarter. At that higher level of granularity, I think you could argue that my identifying assumption is violated, but at the today versus tomorrow, I hope to convince you that it's actually correct. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that this will really be a regression discontinuity design. You will see strong pretrends. So I don't want you to interpret this as a difference in differences approach that would rely on no pretrends. Okay, so with these caveats out of the way, let me show you some results. This is, after all, the empirical track. So here is the impact response of repricing for prices. So focusing first on this left-hand side here. So what am I showing you? I am showing you the log prices, and I am showing you how they develop over time, recentered around the day of the activation of the repricer. Right, and so we see prices trending up a little bit before the repricer is activated. Then I have a little blackout period, which is just a period where I, because of my sampling frequency, don't know yet whether the repricer is activated or not. So I've removed that data. And then we have the first data point where I know the repricer has been activated. And so what we see is a strong discontinuous drop in prices. Right? So what do repricers do, or what does this repricer do at least? On average, it has a negative effect on prices on the order of about 5% in this graph. And at this point, you might say, okay, great, reprices are great. We should make sure everyone does repricing. But already, you see that the buy box prices, which I'd like you to think a little bit of as the cheapest price in the market. It's not quite true, but we're going to treat it as that. We're going to treat the buy box as just being the cheapest for this talk. We see the buy box prices actually don't see this discontinuity. Well, the explanation is obvious, right? What the repricer is doing is it's matching the currently lowest price or just undercutting it by like 1 cent. And so you're seeing, for consumers, there's maybe no huge benefit. Maybe there's a little bit of a benefit if the consumers actually go and have preferences over the various offers. But at least overall, the situation is pro-competitive. What about for the firms? Do the firms benefit? Well, yes, the firms also benefit. Because on the left-hand side here, I'm showing you the buy box share. So you can think of this as exposure to demand. And we see, yes, exposure to demand discontinuously raises when you lower your price. I mean, I showed this, of course, to the repricing company. They were very happy. That's exactly what they claim towards their clients. That seems to be exactly what's going on. Now, as a fun little thing in this data set, I actually do have self-reported costs, essentially because the repricing company wants to know your costs so that it can make sure not to price below your costs. And based on these self-reported costs, which may or may not be economic costs, so just as a caveat, but based on these self-reported costs, I can also show you profits, and we see that profits also discontinuously increase, which I guess makes sense given the buy box share increase. Okay, so that's the good part of this talk. That's the news that repricing on average is good. Now, is it always good? Well, looking back here, we already see this trend in the buy box prices, this strong post-trend where the buy box prices decline over time. And that is going to be driven by two repricers fighting each other, right? I undercut you by 1 cent, you undercut me by 1 cent. Very quickly, we are at a price of $0. So repricers aren't stupid, and they have innovated to avoid this scenario, and the innovation looks a bit like this. So here what I'm showing you is the price of two merchants. They both have offers on a particular Nike shoe, and the price is something around $98. And what the red and the green merchant are doing is one lowers the price, then the other matches the price, and then they lower the price again and match the price again until they reach something like $97.87, and then the red merchant resets the price. And what happens to the green merchant? Well, the green merchant follows him up. Remember, the green merchant probably has a strategy configured that's just price 1 cent below my rival. So when the rival price goes up, the green merchant's price goes up. And now we see these cycling phenomena. And incidentally, in this color strip at the bottom, I'm just showing you who owns the buy box, so who's exposed to demand, and it is generally the lower priced merchant. Now, why do these cycles happen? Because the algorithms systematically bump prices. And you might, at this point, wonder, okay, as economists, as computer scientists, like we understand that, if you raise your price, then your opponent will raise the price, and so it's all good. Is this intentional? Well, we've got this beautiful marketing copy from one of these repricers who say, attention Amazon sellers, raise your prices at night. And they say, look, you can fight the trend of lower prices by periodically raising your prices. And then they go on in this article to explain to their clients that A, when you raise your price, your competitor is likely to raise their price as well. And B, they even understand that if you do that at night, that's a really good idea, because when you raise your price, remember, for a little period of time, you're going to have a very high price, and your opponent is still going to have a low price. So in that period of time, you don't get any demand. So what should you do? You should do that when there is little demand to start with, which is in the middle of the night. So on the left-hand side, we've got the marketing copy that says, OK, they understand this. Let's check, is it actually true in the data? On the right-hand side, I'm showing you, on the x-axis, the hour of the day. And on the y-axis, I measure from top the sales intensity. So I can do that because I have loads of sales observations. And I show, OK, around 5 a.m. Chicago time, that's when there's least sales. And it is true also that measured from the bottom, most cycles are reset around that time. Right? They actually reset like a tiny bit too early, like 25 minutes too early, something like that. But basically, the story holds that it seems that these repricers are aware of these dynamic incentives, even to the extent, even going beyond, you know, say the traditional mass control models of like uniform sales arrivals over time. Now, OK, they are aware of the dynamic incentives and they do this, but does it actually work? That's a key question, right? It could be that they just mess it up, or maybe this is not an equilibrium, they misunderstand their opponents. So we want to evaluate, are price bumps actually effective at raising opponents' prices? And this evaluation is very tricky because selection into price bumps is non-random, right? When do I turn on price bumps? Well, I turn them on when I think that you might be an algorithmic repricer and you're fighting with me. Right? So for starters, when I'm a monopolist, no reason to even go to the algorithmic repricing company. But even if I am fighting with someone else, but they don't have an algorithmic repricer, the price bumps are not going to do anything for me. So the problem is if I did a simple means comparison, say what's the average price conditional on price bumps being on compared to average price conditional on price bumps being off, I have both the selection effect of like tough competition and the actual causal effect of turning on price bumps. So what do I do? Well, I'm going to exploit the fact that the repricing queue at the source company sometimes gets overwhelmed. When that happens, it can't process all repricings and performs only a subset. So on those days, which I should clarify are very rare, I mean, you don't even know the name of the company, but still I should clarify that they are very rare. But sometimes when this happens, we have situations where you configured a price bump, but it never got executed. Right? So you have plausibly exogenous variation in whether the price bump got executed or not. And what I'm showing you here in this table, well, the first row is sort of just a sanity check. You know, is it actually true that your own price increases? That you have a price change when, according to this other data set, you have executed a price bump. It's just like a sanity check. Yes, you do, your price changes two times more. Now, the real question is, what happens to your competitor's price on average when you have price bumps activated compared to when you don't? And what we see is the competitor price raises or increases by around 1.2%. So here we see that, yes, there is this pass-through of about 1/6, right? Your price increases on average by 7.7%. So it's like a 1/6 pass-through to your competitor prices. And keep in mind, there are some competitors that are just passive, and they will just always stay at their price. So this is sort of like an average of those at 0 and other competitors who follow much more. And that's sort of indicated also by the fact that the buy box price moves more. OK, so very briefly, one slide on cycling theory. Suppose there are 3 agent types in the market. There is one passive pricer. There's one type that's passive. They just randomly draw a price. There is one that always undercuts the opponent by 1 cent, and one that cycles. That means they undercut by 1 cent up to a minimum price, and then they go back up to the maximum price. When does the cycle happen? It results when a type U and a type C agent meet. And actually, interestingly, it does not result when a type C and a type C agent meet. So there is a little bit of miscoordination here that is required. And the key insight is that the type U agent is committed to undercutting. He can't reset the cycle. And that forces the C agent to actually do the resetting. No one wants to reset the cycle. Resetting is costly. But because of this commitment, this restriction in strategy space due to the repricing algorithms, what we have is these UC cycles, and they are importantly different from what some of you might know as Maskin-Tirol style HUF cycles. Namely, the welfare implication here is really worrying. Delegated cycling centers at C's monopoly price. So half of the time, the price is going to be above monopoly price when this equilibrium is played. I'm going to say 10 seconds about the long run. Essentially, you might think economy starts with loads of passive people, then the undercutters come in, the undercutters make loads of money because I'm just undercutting you, but then we start meeting undercutters and undercutters. That's bad. We race down to marginal cost. That incentivizes the cyclists to come in. And in the long run, as undercutters and cyclists meet more often, we go to these monopoly prices. And that's why there is some worry about the price in the long run. And with that, I shall conclude. What I've told you today is that there is a common repricing strategy, which is to automatically undercut your rival. And on average, this does lower prices in the short run, so not generally the cheapest price on a product. As reprices increasingly meet, that leads to a race down to marginal cost, which creates incentives for repricing strategy innovation. And one consequence of this innovation has been resetting strategies, which effectively coax competitors to raise prices. And this leads to extremely bad welfare results with cycling around the monopoly price. So the average price is the monopoly price in these situations, and that's really concerning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You showed us figures for two repricers seeming to fight each other. In other industries which don't use algorithms, you have this question of how sustainable is tacit collusion if you have 3 or more firms. Can you say something about, like, more granularly, which market structures, how does that affect your long-term outcomes and cycles and stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So in the paper, I mostly look at the 2-player case. It gets a lot harder to sustain these collusive outcomes with 3 players here. Essentially, what you need is, if you imagine you had 2 undercutters and a cycler, that won't work, right? Because the undercutters, they're just going to keep undercutting the currently lowest price. The cycler can reset, doesn't matter. So what you'd need is you'd need 2 cyclers that reset at the same time to the same price. So interestingly, I think this is another reason for the daily cycles. The daily cycles, they have the ones that reset at night, they often have like an excessively long period and an excessively high price that they reset to. And I think part of the reason for that is that then there's more likelihood of being an overlap, where you are resetting your cycle and I'm resetting my cycle, and thank God we're doing it at the same time so the undercutter also resets. Yeah.
Well, I guess I can try to be louder. I'm having trouble understanding why this is tacit collusion, in the sense that if we have an economy where everyone is an undercutter, then the collusion that you proposed is probably not going to happen. And
right.
So you're assuming that there has to be one type of agent, who is doing this repricing strategy, and that confuses me because I thought that tacit collusion was more meant to be like everyone is best responding, and then somehow the result came out to be collusive. But in this case, if someone is doing the repricing, then how does that render this tacit collusion, I guess, is my question.
Right, yeah, no, excellent question. So I guess you can only really define tacit collusion relative to the setup of the model that you have. So in my paper, what I assume is that basically you're committed to your repricer strategy choice for one period. So you're either a cycler or you're an undercutter. And then once you're committed to that, then we do have these high prices, and I would classify that as tacit collusion. Just because, conditional on the model, like you are raising prices above marginal cost. I agree that here there is some miscoordination required to create the tacit collusion, which, you could have different feelings about. I should say that you can get tacitly collusive outcomes here with less restriction in strategy space. They're going to be less damaging to welfare, and they've been explored extensively by Maskin-Tirol in their HUF cycle paper. But they're much better for welfare, but they're still much worse than marginal cost, yeah. Sure.
Hello? Okay. I might miss something that how do you model the buyer's strategy? Like, will they buy something at the highest price at night, or they just wait for the undercutting and buy at the lowest price? So how will the buyer's strategy influence that?
Yeah, so a great question. So I assume that the buyer is myopic, so they just arrive at a certain point of time and they make a buy or don't buy decision. I agree that that might not be true for all buyers. I do think it's true for most buyers. I will say one more thing, which is that there is this old literature on edge cycles that people often anchor on when they hear this paper, and there the cycles are like really big, right? They'll be like 10% of price or more, and so it might actually make sense to wait. Here the cycle I showed you was like 5 cents, right? And the thing about that is like no one's gonna wait for 5 cents, but at the same time, the danger from it, the welfare danger, is not from the cycle. It's not that you buy at the top when you could have bought at the bottom, but it's just where the cycle is. So I don't think it's as concerning as it could be, but great question. Thank you.
Do we have a question from online?
There's one in the chat.
Yeah. Are these results based on empirical data or simulation?
Oh, it's empirical data. Yeah. Oh, I should clarify that the one thing that was simulation is I showed you at the end, like long run, that was a simulation. But the RDD was data, the price bumps were data, everything else was data, yeah.
Okay. One more question.
Hi, so I'm envisioning a potential actor out there who could look at all of this available data and all of these current cycling prices and say, I'm not very interested in profiting off of good X that's currently going through a cycle myself, but I can see the data. What if I just recorded the lowest price in a current cycle that's reached for a good, set up shop somewhere and told everyone that was the price that's the lowest in this cycle, and if you go through me, as long as you're not super picky about when you exactly place your order, I will always grab the good at that lowest price for you when it's on Amazon, and so make the cycle no longer advantageous for people to engage in. Is that like a feasible strategy one could use to circumvent this whole thing?
Yeah, it is. And actually, there is a company that does this. They're tiny, though. You know, I don't know how many sales they've had, but like maybe less than 1,000 or less than 5,000 for sure. This is sort of related to the other question earlier, though, right? About like the problem is that the size of the cycle just isn't very large in this data, so it's not that concerning. Like it's not worth that much amount of effort on the side of the consumer or a company to make sure that you buy at the lowest price in the cycle. But sure, if consumers were very clever and they always bought at the lowest price in the cycle, then that would change the entire structure of the game. Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Okay, let's take all the other questions at lunch, and let's thank all the speakers and congratulate them on the